Guys, welcome back for another brand new video. It has been a long 10 days not being able to record, but we did find a cool article from Dexterdo. You know how we do it on the channel. We read through our articles and share our opinions towards the end and then have a discussion down in the comments with you guys. So today we're going back into Resident Evil 9. It's been a minute since we've had some details on it, but this article really covers what the sequel has to get right. And it's something I think a lot of fans are, dying to know, especially since the different opinions on whether, Resident Evil moving forward should be first person, how they should take the story, all those details. We're going to get right into that. If you guys are new to the channel and enjoy the content, maybe just consider hitting that subscribe button and just smash the thumbs up on the video, as it does help support the channel. Now let's get right into this article. I said this article is from Dexterdo.com. It's called Resident Evil 9, What the Sequel to Resident Evil Village Needs to Get Right, and it's by Sam Smith. After the success of Resident Evil Village, a Resident Evil 9 seems inevitable, but what should the game look like? Also, what clues did the previous game provide for the sequel? Resident Evil Village teased a Resident Evil 9 once the credits rolled, but it also left lots of plot threads up in the air for fans to dissect. Capcom's horror series has been steadily building to a crescendo since introducing the Winters family in Resident Evil 7, and Resident Evil 9 looks to be the epic finale to their story. However, what do we know about the unannounced but inevitable sequel, and what does Resident Evil 9 need to do to emulate the success of Resident Evil Village? Finally, how does the game avoid becoming a disappointment like Resident Evil 6? Let's explore everything we know. Naturally, spoilers for Resident Evil Village and 7 are pretty much in any other game in the series will appear below. So Resident Evil 9 concluding the Winters family saga. There are many important family names in the Resident Evil universe: Redfield, Wesker, Spencer, but since Resident Evil 7, the series has been dominated by the Winters family drama. What started as an ordinary man searching for his missing wife has turned into an epic saga of gods, monsters, and bioweapons. It's also connected to the wider Resident Evil universe and changed what we thought we knew about the origins of the Umbrella Corporation and their sinister research. While Resident Evil 7 originally felt like a soft reboot, both it and Village are now firmly established as vital chapters in the Resident Evil lore. Ethan Winter's quest to protect his family succeeded, but seemingly at the cost of his own life. However, the Winters family saga isn't over yet, and Resident Evil 9 looks to be the final and definitive chapter in the undead soap opera, as the end of Resident Evil Village told us. The father's story is now done, but not the daughter's. The Resident Evil game may be the 9th mainline entry, but it's also likely to be the 3rd and potential final chapter of the story of Ethan, Mia, and Rose Winters. This means that the game risks suffering from franchise fatigue and will need to differentiate itself from Resident Evil 7 and Village, but without straying too far from what made those games successful. It's a delicate balance to get right, and horror games can struggle to pull it off. Resident Evil 9 needs to pull a Silent Hill 3 and avoid becoming the Dead Space 3. Neither simply upping the action nor stripping the game back to pure survival horror will be enough. The game will need to cater to fans of both Resident Evil 7 and Village while carving out its own legacy. The good news is that a brand new protagonist with a variety of new and exciting abilities may just be what the game needs to shine. The ending of Resident Evil Village showed a now grown-up Rose Winters, either through time or rapid aging like Evelyn, under SWAT team surveillance due to her unpredicted nature. It's clear that Capcom is positioning Rose as Resident Evil 9's protagonist, and the fact that she is walking, talking bioweapon makes for an interesting dynamic. Resident Evil Village has flirted with the superpower characters before, with Jake Wesker in Resident Evil 6 being an example for a playable character enhanced by Umbrella's many viruses. Even Ethan Winters displayed some of the uncanny healing abilities in Resident Evil Village. This was later explained during the game's big twist, with Ethan having actually died in Resident Evil 7, then coming back to life as a mold mutant like many of the creatures he spent 2 games killing. Yet Ethan was still able to father Rose in his undead state, along with his wife Mia Winters, who also spent several years being infected by Evelyn's mold. Several characters in Resident Evil Village reference how powerful and unique Rose is. Even the grown-up Rose tells her handlers that she has no idea what she can do. The question is, how will Capcom make these powers transition into gameplay? More importantly, how can Resident Evil still retain any resemblance of survival horror if we're playing a super-powered protagonist. After the Hollywood action chaos that was Resident Evil 6 failed to win over fans or critics, Capcom stripped the franchise back to bare bones for Resident Evil 7, creating a true survival horror experience. The game combined what made the original Resident Evil successful with modern-day first-person horror elements in a risky experiment that ultimately paid off. Resident Evil Village upped the ante when it came to action, but never lost its identity as a horror experience. Even the universally adored Resident Evil 4 didn't balance horror and action as well as Village. But the question is, what happens now? Just when Capcom thinks they've nailed Resident Evil formula, it begins to grow stale. Resident Evil 6 and both versions of Resident Evil 3 fell afoul of this. Not only does Resident Evil 9 need to avoid the pitfalls of being the third in a trilogy, but it also needs to get the action-horror blend right, gauges players' desires, and deliver a product that ticks everybody. Aside from the horror versus action, one of Resident Evil's most continuous debates relates to the camera angles. In fact, this debate is often linked to the action versus horror debate, with some fans arguing that the game is incapable of being a true survival horror unless it brings back the fixed camera angles of the early Resident Evil titles. In 2021, this has been proven false. The Resident Evil 2 remake and Resident Evil 7 both demonstrated that Resident Evil can do survival horror perfectly well with modern camera angles, be it first person or the over-the-shoulder style with the recent remakes. As fans turn their attention to Resident Evil 9, these debates are likely to resurface again, with some fans arguing that Resident Evil 9 should go back to the earlier camera style. Lots of Resident Evil fans will still be uncomfortable with Resident Evil being in a first person. It was a radical departure from what had come before, so those that fell in love with the series on the PS1 or during the Resident Evil 4 era do have our sympathy. However, nobody can argue that Resident Evil in first person doesn't work and can't be scary. The traditional Resident Evil mechanic worked just as well in first person, as it also lets out the series borrow from recent horror masterpieces like Amnesia, Outlast, and Alien Isolation. It also allows Resident Evil 9 to remain congruent with Resident Evil 7 and Village. It is the third part of the trilogy after all. Resident Evil may reinvent itself again after Resident Evil 9, but the game should be a true and definitive conclusion to the Winters family saga. It can also only deliver that by emulating what worked with 7 and Village, as well as delivering on its own merit. Until Capcom begins talking about Resident Evil 9, though, fans have the upcoming free Resident Evil Village DLC to look forward to. We also feel like the DLC will give us some insight on what Resident Evil 9 can look like. Resident Evil Village owners will also get to play the online multiplayer companion game Resident Evil Verse in 2022 when this finally releases. There's also Resident Evil Outrage to consider. Finally, the rumors of Resident Evil 4 remake also continue to swirl around the internet like the T-Virus in a Raccoon City drain. So there's everything that Resident Evil 9 needs to get right, and they did point out a lot of good stuff. One, the main thing we've covered on the channel, and a lot of people have been talking about, is the camera angles. I think personally, a option of both third person over the shoulder and first person, and you could switch back and forth, I think that'll be just pleasing enough. I don't think the fixed camera angles would work with this new Resident Evil formula. 7 and Village, as you know, have both been in the first person style, and I don't think just jumping back to that fixed camera is going to work for it. I think they just need to finish this trilogy out with what made it so good in the first place. I mean, Resident Evil 7 is terrifyingly scary, and then Resident Evil 7, I think, and Resident Evil Village had a great mix of horror elements with big action moments, and I think that's what made it so good. I definitely preferred Resident Evil Village more, just because Resident Evil 7 at certain points, I'm not a big horror movie person, so at points in Resident Evil 7, it definitely made it a little bit harder to play because it was, actually scarier. So with all that being said, I mean, Resident Evil 9, I think, just needs to have both camera angles in my sense, but I also think the story does need to be compelling. And it does make a good point about if you're playing a protagonist with superhuman abilities or superpowers, how do you have that person not overpowered and being able to just run through everything? Usually what worked in Resident Evil was just a normal human using normal guns, normal, findings of what can help them around in their environment. But having like a telekinesis power may make the game a little bit too overpowered. One thing I feel like they could use as a model, if they're going to have someone with some sort of superpowers, is the original BioShock. I think those games had a little bit of a scary element with the splicers just running at you, and little things like that. And so I think if you're going to have powers, you can try to emulate a little bit of what the early Bioshock games did. But that's just my opinion. I want to hear you guys' thoughts down below as well. That's going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy. Hopefully we'll have another one up soon. I'm working from home this week, so thank you all so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video, please be sure to smash the thumbs up button. Consider subscribing here if you guys are new, and turn on that notification bell so you guys never miss uploads. We are doing a giveaway once we hit YouTube Partner, so be on the lookout for that. The details are in the description. As always, my name is Ross, and I will see you guys in the next video.